Aquaman is officially the highest grossing DCEU movie of all time, but does it really deserve it of all the praise it's been getting? Let's talk numbers on this week's box office prediction show. Hello and welcome to Rich Go Reviews. On this channel, I talk all about movies. Today, on the week of January 7th, we're talking all about box office predictions for Aquaman and seeing if it can outlast the competition and stay the King of Atlantis. So, as you see, I made my predictions last week, and as you'll see, they're a bit off. And that's alright. I mean, they're close, some of them, but I really underestimated Escape Room. And maybe that's because I'm not a big horror guy myself. And, you know, we'll see where it landed in the competition. So, the actual numbers for this week, coming in 5th place is Bumblebee. And Bumblebee, it's continued to last, but it hasn't been doing as great as the other Transformers movies. And I wonder if that's because of a little bit of Transformers fatigue and because it's not doing that great at the box office. But it's a phenomenal movie, and I recommend that you check it out. Whether it'll last into next week's top 5, we'll have to find out. Next up is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and that movie is continuing to do well. It has some legs, and you know, it was a big drop-off for most movies this week, with a 30% drop on average for most of these movies that are in a couple of their weeks. And then next up is Mary Poppins, and again, the families aren't necessarily out to see. I had Mary Poppins I was thinking it was going to make 20 million. It ended up doing 15.7, which isn't as bad. I expected to do a little bit better. Just didn't quite last to what I wanted it to. Same with Spider-Man and Bumblebee. A little bit under my predictions. January is not a big month for movies, and you know, most people aren't going to see it. Maybe they went out with their families and they just don't want to go to the theater again. They don't want to spend that money. January typically isn't a great month for movies coming out. And again, I told you I really underestimated Escape Room. Escape Room ended up making around $18 million, which is a pretty good opening for a horror movie. You know, a lot of these are lower budget movies, so it's going to make a pretty nice multiple on its initial budget. And the King of Atlantis, he stays up top. He had around a 40% drop. Aquaman, he made $30.7 million this week, which was $6 million less than I projected. Now, the funny thing is, this movie is doing insanely well overseas. It's doing okay domestically, and I'll get to that in a bit. But overseas, where Aquaman rules, it is absolutely dominating in China and everywhere else. It's the highest grossing DCEU movie of all time. And so, you know, my competition this week, I didn't do that great, but I still got the number one, and I still got a couple of the other picks that are in there. Next up, let's talk next week. What comes out next week? Well, first of all, there's a Keanu Reeves movie that was filmed a couple years ago and is now just being released called Replicas that's coming out. Another movie coming out is A Dog's Way Home, and this movie actually looks very similar to A Dog's Purpose, which came out 2 years ago. But there are people that love these, you know, heartwarming, emotional stories about dogs and animals, and I think that could do very well this week. Next up is On the Basis of Sex, and that movie's about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and kind of her story coming into being a lawyer and a judge and all of that. It's kind of a woman empowerment movie, and that's pretty much it coming out this week. Actually, there is Upside, which is the Kevin Hart and Bryan Cranston movie. And it's kind of a comedy, kind of a drama, a dramedy, if you will. And, you know, it may do well. But let's see what I projected. So, 5th on my list, I have Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So, I still think this movie is going to have some legs. And if it continues on its 30% decrease, it's going to end up at around a $9 million weekend, the upcoming week for January 11th. Next up on my list, I have The Upside. So typically, Kevin Hart, I would not consider him a big movie star yet. His movies, his comedies open around $10 million, and I know that's his stand-up routines are a little bit different than a movie, but he's not a massive movie star, and neither is Bryan Cranston. He's big from Breaking Bad and TV, but I really only believe that this movie is going to open around $10 million, and I may be blown out of the water. I may be totally wrong with that. It may end up doing 20, 25 million, probably not above that, but we'll see what happens this weekend. And next up, I have A Dog's Way Home. So A Dog's Way Home at number 3. I think this is a pretty good spot for it. I think, I compared this to A Dog's Purpose, which I mentioned earlier, and A Dog's Purpose actually grossed $18 million opening weekend in 2017. It's a very similar movie. They both open in January, so $16 million is a pretty good projection for that. And at number 2, I actually have On the Basis of Sex. So I was between Dog's Way Home and Basis of Sex for 2 and 3. But Basis of Sex, I have grossing actually $18 million. I kind of compared this to Hidden Figures, which came out around the same time. It has a little bit of buzz from the award season, but I haven't seen any big trailers or advertising movement for it. Hidden Figures opened to $22 million, while I think this movie is only going to open to about $18 million, which is actually going to be pretty nice because, like I said, those awards movies aren't necessarily big budget movies. And at number 1 again, I have Aquaman. Now, I actually compared the Aquaman in its 4th week now to Wonder Woman in its 4th week. Wonder Woman dropped about almost 40%, and I think Aquaman is going to do similar, drop around 35%, 35%, and do $20 million in its 4th week. So the King of Atlantis stays at the top. And there's been a lot of talk this week about whether Aquaman is the best DCEU movie. Now, that's up for debate with you. I'm interested in seeing, did you actually see it, and what are your thoughts on the actual movie? I actually haven't seen it, and I just have grown kind of tired of the DC movies, and once it got a couple bad reviews, I wasn't very interested. I'm not used to doing that, but I actually had to do it with this movie. So what's interesting with Aquaman is, as I said, it's the highest grossing DCEU movie of all time. Right now, it is sitting at $943 million worldwide at the box office. That's pretty incredible. No DC movie has made over $1 billion. DCEU movie. The last one that did it in the DC universe was actually Dark Knight Rises, which Dark Knight Rises and Dark Knight both made over $1 billion. Now, how does this stack up with, let's say, a Wonder Woman? Well, Wonder Woman in its entire run made $821 million. Aquaman in its 17 days already beat that. And that's almost like unfathomable that it did that already. As far as domestically, though, this is where it gets kind of interesting. Is Aquaman domestically at this point in its run up to 17 days is 4th in the DCEU behind Wonder Woman, Batman vs Superman, and Suicide Squad, which all grossed higher than it within 17 days. Now, it's actually not doing that well domestically, and maybe that's because people are similar to me, where they're just kind of growing tired of these movies. But worldwide, it's a different story. Now, Aquaman on Rotten Tomatoes, it's actually the second highest rated critically and audience score. Right now, it's holding about a 65% critics rating and an 80% audience score. Wonder Woman is actually the highest with a 93% and 88% respectively. So, Aquaman is doing really well. Is it necessarily deserved of all of its praise? Sure, to an extent, but is it actually the best DC movie? I don't know. That's debatable. Looking at these facts and figures, it's not #1 in all of them, where it's just completely dominating, whereas Wonder Woman has the highest in a lot of these categories. It was the highest worldwide before Aquaman. So, what do you guys think about this? Is Aquaman a great movie to you? Are you interested in seeing how high it grosses? What number do you think Aquaman will end up reaching? Will it reach 1.5 billion? I doubt it, but you never know. And if you guys are interested in more box office videos like this, make sure you come back each week where I do a box office breakdown, a box office prediction show every single week for the rest of the year. Thanks for watching.